Changing the world, one person at a time. I'm here to take you on a journey today. And I want you to listen to me very, very carefully because you are destined to make an impact like that. You're destined to change the world. Now, I'm a storyteller. I am not confused about that. I tell good stories, and I'm going to start this presentation this morning with a story. In 1982, there was a shooting war that ensued over a small island group in the southern Atlantic Ocean, 300 miles east of Argentina. It was a British colony, and the Argentinians and the British had been arguing about this island chain for over 150 years. Whose is this? Who owns this? And so they got into a shooting war, and the casualty rates were very high. While all this was going on, there was a Brazilian sea captain who had been given the charge to take his vessel down through the Falkland Island Straits and deposit supplies at the southern end of the island chain. To do that, he had to pass directly in between the Argentinians, who were on the right, shooting at the British, who were on his left. The prospects looked a little grim. They were in a shooting war, and he was trying to figure out how to make this journey without losing his vessel and his crew members. So he, being the creative tactician that he was, instructed his crew to paint the right side of his vessel in the colors and the configuration of the Argentinian flag. And he instructed them to paint the left side of his vessel in the colors and the configuration of the British flag, in the hopes that when he sailed between these two armies, neither one of those armies would fire on their flag or their colors. And so he began his voyage. And it was successful. He got to the southern end of the island chain. There hadn't been a shot fired. As a matter of fact, both of the armies laid down their weapons and sang their national anthems as he was making his trek between these two parts of the island group. When he got to his destination, he was feeling pretty smug about himself and pretty boastful about his bad self and that he had made this trek without a single shot being fired. And so he gave his crew a party. He brought out all the best food they had on board the ship. Unfortunately, he also brought out all the alcohol that was on the ship. And as you can well imagine, they got pretty boisterous. Well, in the middle of all of this celebration, when everything had kind of reached a peak, he made a very tactical error. He said, "You know what? That was so much fun. I want you to turn the boat around and go back up between the islands and come back. We're going to do it again." Now, you can imagine what might have happened, right? Now he reversed the order, and he would have flown his ship between the island pieces, and they would have aggressed him. They would have shot, because now they were shooting at the opposite flag. Now, this captain made a serious tactical error. In the final analysis, what he did was he failed to keep his eyes focused on what he was doing there in the first place. He lost sight of what he had been called to do. Now, I want to take you on a journey today of self-exploration, because you're all destined for greatness. Every one of you is destined for greatness. And if you're going to accomplish what you've been called to do, you've got to keep your eyes on the prize. You've heard that. My prayer and my hope for you would be that one day you can look back on your life and you will say, "It is finished. I have done it. I've done what I've come to do." This journey requires self-evaluation. It was Socrates that said that the unexamined life is not worth living. So we're going to take you today on a journey that will help you to see the world-changing attributes in your life, and it will encourage you to not take your eyes off the prize. Pay attention to what you've been called to. Now, I have to ask you a couple of questions, and I want you to go on this introspective journey with me today. The things that I'm going to speak to you about are not theoretical in nature. These are things that work. I'm a pragmatist. If it doesn't work, I don't need to spend any time on it. So what you're going to hear today, what you're going to be asked to do within your own self is all practical. It works. I'm going to ask you 2 opening questions that will help me and you understand how this door opens for us. Here's the first one. Think about this. How are you living? I mean, how are you really living? Let me make it even clearer. Who are you when the lights go out? Who are you when nobody's there with you? Who are you when you're lost in your thoughts and no one knows what you're thinking? Who are you then? How are you living? Second question. How are you leading? Now I know what you're going to say. I could ask for a show of hands of how many of you have ever fashioned yourself to be a leader. Some of you would say, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced, nobody's ever called me a leader, I have never ever seen myself as a leader. I beg to differ with you. If you are interacting under the human condition, even in this room, you are influencing somebody. You are a person of influence. And because you are a person of influence, you are in effect leading. All of you are leading in some way. And I'm going to open up some rudiments now. You can see it on the screen in front of you. These are the rudiments of a self-examined life that lead to an impactful lifestyle. And there are 7 of them. Listen carefully to what I've got to say. We go through this pretty rapidly. I just don't have time to spend on each one of these, but listen carefully to these. How is your thought life? We might also say, how's your prayer life? How's your reflective time? We pray because it works. When you're in this self-reflective moment, ask yourself for wisdom. I need wisdom to influence correctly. I need wisdom to influence toward a progressive end. I need to keep my eyes on the prize. A.W. Tozer, in his book simply titled Prayer, said this: in the final analysis, all other things being equal, you can only pray as well as you live. So I might say again, how are you living? How are you living? Number 2, in your interactions with the people around you, are you considering character first? There are some in this room that may be in positions of hiring and firing, evaluating people for a position in your organization. Here's what we say. We hire for character first, and we train for skill. We train for competence. Now, let me tell you something about character, and I can tell a lot about your character when I see you with your back to the wall. You see, you've heard it said that character is built through adversity. That's not true. Adversity will either toughen you or it will kill you, but adversity reveals your character. Adversity does not build character. Never forget that. So if I want to get to know you, if you want to get to know somebody else, not that you would wish tragedy on anybody, but you look for their response. How are they living when they're under pressure? Number 3, are you listening first or judging first? If you're going to be a person of influence, you need to listen more than you speak. Effective communication is almost 50% active listening, not speaking. Here's a question I have for you. When you are engaged and when you're listening, are you really listening, or are you just keeping your mouth closed, waiting for the other person to stop so that you can respond? Are you listening first, or are you judging first? Are your boots the first on the field of battle, and the last off. This is a fundamental tenet of effective leadership. Be first. Be the first in and the last out. No one can be led from behind. You can push from behind, but you cannot lead from behind. The best definition of leadership, or the best definition of quality influence that I've ever heard, is you've got somebody following you. Now, if you're wondering whether you're leading, look over your shoulder. If there's nobody back there, you're just out for a walk. I hate to tell you this, you're not leading. Look over your shoulder. Who's coming behind you? Who's following you? I want you to get into the habit of using a 70% decision-making criteria. The worst decisions that you will ever make will be the decisions that you labor over too long. Or in a worst-case scenario, the decisions that you don't make because you're afraid to pull the trigger. Here's what you need. You need 70% of the available intel or the available information or the available data that you can gather. You need 70% of the resources that might be available to you in order to make a move, and you need to be 70% certain of success. When you've got those three 70% pieces in place, pull the trigger. Act decisively. People follow clarity and decisive decisions. Do not labor too long. All you need is 70%. And by the way, while I'm thinking about it, it's always better to apologize than to ask permission. Do your homework, get to 70%, and act. People will follow you. Number 6, are you prone to going internal? When you're under pressure, you go internal because you're feeling too much about yourself. The self-aggrandizing, self-supportive person is a greater liability on the battlefield than the enemy himself. Do not go internal. Don't draw within yourself when the situation looks bad. Again, this goes back to character. I can tell who you are by the way you're acting when the stress is on you. The last one. This one is said as a question, but it really should be said as a command. The command would be this: never sound retreat. Never sound retreat. If you're going to go on to the field of battle, then finish what you came there to do. If you're not going to give it all, don't go in the first place. Don't go at all. Never, ever sound retreat. You've got 7 elements here of self-examination. The self-examined life is where you have to go if you're going to be a world changer. I've got to know myself above all else. Now, there's a cautionary point that I have to make here. People that are examining themselves oftentimes fall into the trap of it's good enough. Good enough is the enemy of greatness. The reason is because good enough never is. It's never enough. Now, you should be asking me right now, or asking yourself, this is all great, great words, great message, but how do I do this? I examine myself, yes. I'm careful not to accept the good enough, but there's got to be more, and there is. The man whose name is on the trophy that's handed out to the Super Bowl champions every year is Vince Lombardi. Lombardi was obviously a football icon, but he was so much more than that. He was an icon relative to every one of these things you see on the screen in front of you. He was an icon of influence, an icon of life-changing behaviors. And he was speaking in front of a group of businessmen. You see, successful people want to know how to go from good to great. And Lombardi was great. One of the people that was in one of these meetings with him was Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca was the man that was hired by the Chrysler Corporation in 1968 to save the corporation from bankruptcy. And when Lombardi was done speaking, Iacocca came up to him and said, "Coach, how do you do this? I hear everything you're saying, and I agree with everything you're saying, but how do you get these young men to perform at the level at which they perform so that they win consistently?" And he said, "We do three things. We master the fundamentals. We do that by repeating over and over and over and over again. This does not fall in your lap. You've got to do it over and over again. Master the fundamentals." And he said, by mastering the fundamentals through repetition, we begin to see an instillment of discipline so that we are confident that these men do the same thing all the time. Not some of the time, all the time. And then Lombardi paused and he said to Iacocca, he said, "You've seen many football teams who are very, very masterful with fundamentals, and they are very disciplined, but yet they don't win like the Green Bay Packers win. What's going on here, Coach?" And Lombardi said, "Here's what's going on. The third element is love. These men love the people they're playing with. They love the game, yes, but they love the ones that are next to them, even more so than they love themselves." Ladies and gentlemen, you have to lean into this. Love is the secret sauce. It is the secret sauce. That is what will separate you. Find a way to love the people next to you. They are more important than you. The reason is because it's not about you. It's not all about you. You have to develop the warrior attribute of sacrificial love in whatever endeavor you're in. You see, there's a reason why I say all this to you. I am not the least bit concerned about you setting your goals too high and missing. But I am concerned about you setting your goals too low and achieving them. That's good enough. Good enough is the enemy of greatness. Do three things when you get up from here today. Take someone by the arm, one of your colleagues that you're sitting with here, and say to them, "I am a person of influence. I am going to change the world." And then lay the accountability piece on top of it and say, "Now watch me. Now watch me." One more time. I am a person of influence. I am a world changer. Watch me. Thank you very much for your time this morning and allowing me to share with you. Thank you.